Okay. Tonight is the 30th of August 2010, and this is the 41st talk on the Majjhima Nikaya. Now we come to Sutta 101, Devadaha Sutta. At Devadaha, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at a town of the Sakyans named Devadaha. Then the Blessed One addressed the monks thus, "Monks, Venerable Sir," they replied. The Blessed One said, "Monks, there are some recluses and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine and view as this. Whatever this person feels, whether pleasure or pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past. So by annihilating with asceticism past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequence in the future. With no consequence in the future, there is the destruction of action. With the destruction of action, there is the destruction of suffering. With the destruction of suffering, there is the destruction of feeling. With the destruction of feeling, all suffering will be exhausted. So speak the Nigantas, monks." Stop here for a moment. These Nigantas are one of three types of naked ascetics. They are also called Jains, and even up to today, they're still surviving in India. But nowadays, there are two types of Jains ascetics. One type is naked, but with a small cloth covering their private part, and another type is not naked. And the Buddha continued, "I go to the Nigantas who speak thus, and I say, 'Friend Nigantas, is it true that you hold such a doctrine and view as this? Whatever this person feels, whether pleasure or pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past,' etc. If, when they are asked thus, the Nigantas admit this and say, 'Yes,' I say to them, 'But friends, do you know that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist?' 'No, friend.' 'But friends, do you know that you did evil actions in the past, and did not abstain from them?' 'No, friend.' 'But friends, do you know that so much suffering has already been exhausted, or that so much suffering has still to be exhausted, or that when so much suffering has been exhausted, all suffering will have been exhausted?' 'No, friend.' 'But friends, do you know what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is, here and now?' 'No, friend.' So friends, it seems that you do not know that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist, or that you did evil actions in the past, and did not abstain from them, or that you did such and such evil actions, or that so much suffering has already been exhausted, or that so much suffering has still to be exhausted, or that when so much suffering has been exhausted, all suffering will have been exhausted, or what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is, here and now. That being so, it is not fitting for the Venerable Nigantas to declare, whatever this person feels, whether pleasure or pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past. So by annihilating with asceticism past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequence in the future, etc., etc., and all suffering will be exhausted. If, friend Nigantas, you knew that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist, or that you did evil actions in the past, and did not abstain from them, or that you did such and such evil actions, or that so much suffering has already been exhausted, or that so much suffering has still to be exhausted, or that when so much suffering has been exhausted, all suffering will have been exhausted, or what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is, here and now. That being so, it would be fitting for the Venerable Nigantas to declare, whatever this person feels, all is due to past karma, etc. So, stop here for a moment. So the Buddha asked them whether they existed in the past, but they say they don't know. And whether they did evil actions in the past also, they said they don't know. Or how much suffering has been exhausted also, they don't know. So the Buddha said, in which case it's not valid for you to say that all that is due to past karma, etc. Friend Nigantas, suppose a man were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison, and because of this he felt painful, racking, piercing feelings. Then his friends and companions, kinsmen and relatives, brought a surgeon. The surgeon would cut around the opening of the wound with a knife, probe for the arrow with a probe, pull out the arrow, and apply a medicinal cauterizer to the opening of the wound. And at each step, the man would feel painful, racking, piercing feelings. Then on a later occasion, when the wound was healed and covered with skin, the man would be well and happy, independent, master of himself, able to go where he likes. He might think, formerly I was pierced by an arrow, thickly smeared with poison, and because of this I felt painful, racking, piercing feelings. Then my friends and companions, kinsmen and relatives brought a surgeon. The surgeon cut around the opening of the wound with a knife, probed for the arrow with a probe, pulled out the arrow and applied a medicinal cauterizer to the opening of the wound. And at each step I felt painful, racking, piercing feelings. But now that the wound is healed and covered with skin, I am well and happy, independent, my own master, able to go where I like. So too, friend Nigantas, if you knew that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist, etc., etc., or what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is, here and now, that being so, it would be fitting for the Venerable Nigantas to declare, whatever this person feels, of all that is due to evil actions in the past, etc., etc. But since, friend Nigantas, you do not know that you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist, etc., etc., or what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is, here and now, it is not fitting for the Venerable Nigantas to declare, whatever this person feels, whether pleasure or pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past, etc. Stop it for a moment. When this was said, the Nigantas told me, friend, the Niganta Nataputta is omniscient and all-seeing, and claims to have complete knowledge and vision thus. Whether I am walking or standing or asleep or awake, knowledge and vision are continuously and uninterruptedly present to me. He says thus, Nigantas, you have done evil actions in the past. Exhaust them with the performance of piercing austerities. And when you are here and now restrained in body, speech and mind, that is, doing no evil actions for the future, so by annihilating with asceticism past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequence in the future. With no consequence in the future, all suffering will be exhausted. We approve of and accept this, and so we are satisfied. When this was said, I told the Nigantas, there are 5 things, friend Nigantas, that may turn out in 2 different ways here and now. What 5? They are faith, approval, oral tradition, reason, cogitation, and reflective acceptance of a view. These 5 things may turn out in 2 different ways, here and now. Herein, what kind of faith do the Venerable Nigantas have in a teacher who speaks about the past? What kind of approval, what kind of oral tradition, what kind of reason, cogitation, what kind of reflective acceptance of a view? Speaking thus, monks, I did not see any legitimate defense of their position by the Nigantas. Stop here for a moment. So this head of the Nigantas is this man called Niganta Nataputta. He has another name, I forgot. Mahavira, I think his name. That's his other name. So Buddha is telling them that if you believe in a certain view, normally it's based on 5 things, either on faith or approval or oral tradition, reason, cogitation, and reflective acceptance. And then he says, what kind of approval, what kind of oral tradition, what kind of reason, cogitation, what kind of reflective acceptance, and they don't mention any of these. So basically the Buddha says, what you believe in, there's no good basis. Again, monks, I said to the Nigantas, what do you think, friend Nigantas? When there is intense exertion, intense striving, you then feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. But when there is no intense exertion, no intense striving, do you then not feel any painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion? And they said, when there is intense exertion, friend Gautama, intense striving, then we feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. But when there is no intense exertion, no intense striving, then we do not feel any painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. Stop here for a moment. Here, these people are not like Buddhist monks. Buddhist monks, we meditate. We don't torture ourselves. But these people, they purposely torture their body with all kinds of ascetic practices. So that's why when they strive, they feel intense pain. And the Buddha said, so it seems, friend Nigantas, that when there is intense exertion, intense striving, etc., you feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. But when there is no intense exertion, no intense striving, you do not feel any painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. That being so, it is not fitting for the Venerable Niganta to declare, whatever this person feels, whether pleasure or pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past. So by annihilating with asceticism past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequence in the future, etc., and all suffering will be exhausted. If, friend Nigantas, when there was intense exertion, intense striving, then painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion was present, and when there was no intense exertion, no intense striving, then painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion were still present. That being so, it would be fitting for the Venerable Nigantas to declare, whatever this person feels, whether painful or pleasurable, etc., all that is due to actions in the past. But since, friend Nigantas, when there is intense exertion, intense striving, then you feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. But when there is no intense exertion, no intense striving, then you do not feel painful, racking, piercing feelings due to intense exertion. You are therefore feeling only the painful, racking, piercing feelings of your self-imposed exertion. And it is through ignorance, unknowing and delusion that you mistakenly hold whatever this person feels, all that is due to the actions of the past, etc. Speaking thus, monks, I did not see any legitimate defense of their position by the Nigantas. Stop here for a moment. So here, the Buddha shows them that when they practice these ascetic practices and torture their body, then of course they feel pain. But when they don't torture their body, there's no pain. So how can you say then that all your feelings are due to past actions? Again, monks, I said to the Nigantas, what do you think, friend Nigantas? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced here and now can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in the next life? And they said, no, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced in the next life can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced here and now? No, friend. What do you think, friend Nigantas? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced as pleasant can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as painful? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced as painful can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as pleasant? No, friend. What do you think, friend Nigantas? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality can, by exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced by an unmatured personality? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced by an unmatured personality can, by exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality? No, friend. What do you think, friend Nigantas? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be much experienced can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be little experienced? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is to be little experience can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be much experience? No, friend. What do you think, friend Nigantas? Is it possible that an action whose result is to be experienced can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is not to be experienced? No, friend. But is it possible that an action whose result is not to be experienced can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced? No, friend. So it seems, friend Nigantas, that it is impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced here and now can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in the next life. And impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced in the next life can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced here and now. Impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced as pleasant can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as painful. And impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced as painful can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced as pleasant. Impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality can, by exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in an unmatured personality. And impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced in an unmatured personality can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced in a matured personality. Impossible that an action whose result is to be much experienced can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be little experience. And impossible that an action whose result is to be little experience can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be much experience. Impossible that an action whose result is to be experienced can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is not to be experienced. And impossible that an action whose result is not to be experienced can, through exertion and striving, become one whose result is to be experienced. That being so, Venerable Nigantas, the Venerable Nigantas' exertion is fruitless, their striving is fruitless. So the Buddha, by slowly showing them that you cannot change karma and the result, because it's only logical, step by step, the Buddha shows them until in the end they have to admit that if action whose result is to be experienced, you cannot change it so that it cannot be experienced. So speak the Nigantas monks, and because the Nigantas speak thus, there are 10 legitimate deductions from their assertions that provide ground for censuring them. 1. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by what was done in the past, then the Nigantas surely must have done bad deeds in the past, since now they feel such painful, racking, piercing feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by the creative act of a supreme God, then the Nigantas surely must have been created by an evil supreme God, since they now feel such painful, racking, piercing feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by circumstance and nature, then the Nigantas surely must have bad luck, since they now feel such painful, racking, piercing feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by class, then the Nigantas surely must belong to a bad class, since they now feel such painful, racking, piercing feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by exertion here and now, then the Nigantas surely must strive badly here and now, since they now feel such painful, racking, piercing feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by what was done in the past, then the Nigantas are to be censured. If not, then the Nigantas are still to be censured. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by the creative act of a supreme God, then the Nigantas are to be censured. If not, they are still to be censured. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by chance, then the Nigantas are to be censured. If not, they are still to be censured. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by class, then the Nigantas are to be censured. If not, they are still to be censured. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by exertion here and now, then the Nigantas are to be censured. If not, they are still to be censured. So speak the Nigantas monks, and because the Nigantas speak thus, these 10 legitimate deductions from their assertions provide grounds for censuring them. Thus their exertion is fruitless, their striving is fruitless. Let's stop here for a moment. So the Buddha, by logic, use this argument to show that whether the feelings are caused by bad deeds or not by bad deeds, it's still they kind of deserve it. If it's caused by bad deeds, then they must have done a lot of bad deeds, so they deserve it. If it's not caused by actions in the past, but other people don't feel and they feel, then they deserve it also, etc. And how is exertion fruitful, monks? How is striving fruitful? Here, monks, a monk is not overwhelmed by suffering and does not overwhelm himself with suffering. And he does not give up the pleasure that accords with Dhamma. Yet he is not infatuated with that pleasure. He knows thus, when I strive with determination, this particular source of suffering fades away in me because of that determined striving. And when I look on with equanimity, this particular source of suffering fades away in me while I develop equanimity. He strives with determination in regard to the particular source of suffering which fades away in him because of the determined striving. And he develops equanimity in regard to the particular source of suffering which fades away in him while he is developing equanimity. When he strives with determination, such and such a source of suffering fades away in him because of the determined striving. Thus that suffering is exhausted in him. When he looks on with equanimity, such and such a source of suffering fades away in him while he develops equanimity. Thus that suffering is exhausted in him. Stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says, if a monk strives and it helps to get rid of that suffering, then he should strive. And if by practicing equanimity it helps to get rid of the suffering, then he should practice equanimity. For example, if a monk is troubled by desire and lust or sleepiness, for example, and then he strives, uses energy, energetic effort, and then his mind becomes one-pointed, and then that source of suffering, desire and lust or sleepiness, fades away. Or if his mind is agitated by something, then he practices equanimity. Don't want to feel attachment, and then it fades away. Suppose, monks, a man loved a woman with his mind bound to her by intense desire and passion. He might see that woman standing with another man, chatting, joking and laughing. What do you think, monks? Would not sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair arise in that man when he sees that woman standing with another man, chatting, joking and laughing? Yes, venerable sir. Why is that? Because that man loves that woman with his mind bound to her by intense desire and passion. That is why sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair would arise in him when he sees her standing with another man, chatting, joking and laughing. Then, monks, the man might think, I love this woman with my mind bound to her by intense desire and passion. Thus sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair arise in me when I see her standing with another man, chatting, joking and laughing. What if I were to abandon my desire and lust for that woman? He would abandon his desire and lust for that woman. On a later occasion, he might see that woman standing with another man, chatting, joking and laughing. What do you think, monks? Would sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair arise in that man when he sees that woman standing with another man, laughing and joking, etc.? No, venerable sir. Why is that? Because that man no longer loves that woman. That is why sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair do not arise in him when he sees that woman standing with another man, etc. So too, monks, when a monk is not overwhelmed by suffering and does not overwhelm himself with suffering, and he does not give up the pleasure that accords with Dhamma, yet he is not infatuated with that pleasure. He knows thus, when I strive with determination, this particular source of suffering fades away in me because of that determined striving, etc., etc. Thus the suffering is exhausted in him. Thus, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. Stop here for a moment. So the earlier part, the Buddha says, a monk is not overwhelmed by suffering and does not overwhelm himself with suffering. If he understands the Dhamma, when suffering comes, he doesn't allow himself to be overwhelmed by that suffering. And also, he does not overwhelm himself, make himself torture himself with suffering. And he does not give up the pleasure that accords with Dhamma. This pleasure that accords with Dhamma probably is the pleasure and bliss from meditation, from deep meditation, jhanic bliss. Yet he is not infatuated with that pleasure. So this example given by the Buddha is quite a striking example. A lot of young people, when they are very attached to their boyfriend or their girlfriend, and they see their boyfriend or girlfriend laughing and joking with another man or woman, then they get totally upset. They just cannot accept it because of attachment. This very common example. And if that person is wise, then he gives up the attachment. Again, monks, a monk considers thus: while I live according to my pleasure, unwholesome states increase in me, and wholesome states diminish. But when I exert myself in what is painful, unwholesome states diminish in me, and wholesome states increase. What if I were to exert myself in what is painful? He exerts himself in what is painful. When he does so, unwholesome states diminish in him, and wholesome states increase. At a later time, he does not exert himself in what is painful. Why is that? The purpose for which that monk exerted himself in what is painful has been achieved. That is why at a later time, he does not exert himself in what is painful. Stop it for a moment. So here, just to give an example, for example, after our meal, most people will feel very sleepy. So if we follow our tendencies and live according to our pleasure, then we go and sleep a lot. But what happens? The Buddha says unwholesome states increase, sloth and torpor. The mind becomes torpid, and when you try to meditate, it's very difficult. And wholesome states diminish. But instead of going to sleep, this person he puts forth energy, at least to fight that sleepiness. Because it is, as he says, it's painful, it's unpleasant. But when he strives in the right way, then unwholesome states diminish. The mind starts to clear up. The sleepiness goes away. Wholesome states increase. So he exerts himself. So later, when he has attained a clearer mind, then he doesn't have to put off so much. Doesn't have to put so much effort. When he's tired, he lies down. But of course, by then he will have the skill to maintain his mindfulness, his recollection. Suppose monks, an arrowsmith, were warming and heating an arrow shaft between two flames, making it straight and workable. When the arrow shaft has been warmed and heated between the two flames and had been made straight and workable, then at a later time he would not again warm and heat the arrow shaft and make it straight and workable. Why is that? The purpose for which that arrowsmith had warmed and heated the arrow and made it straight and workable has been achieved. That is why at a later time he would not again warm and heat the arrow shaft and make it straight and workable. So too, a monk considers thus: while I live according to my pleasure, unwholesome states increase in me, etc. But when I exert myself in what is painful, unwholesome states diminish. What if I were to exert myself, etc.? That is why at a later time he does not exert himself in what is painful. Thus, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. I'll stop here for a moment. So this simile of the arrowsmith warming and heating the arrow shaft and making it straight, and after that he doesn't need to do it again, shows that the monk makes effort, and then he gets rid of the sloth and torpor, the sloth and torpor has vanished because he has attained the jhanas. The 5 hindrances are eliminated. After which he doesn't have to make so much effort. Again, monks, here a Tathagata appears in the world, Arahant Sammasambuddha. Here he's quoting, the Buddha is quoting this part now, is exactly as found in Sutta 51, section 12 to 19. I guess it's about a person after hearing the Dhamma, he goes forth and then he practices charana, the conduct of a monk or the practice of a monk, and then finally comes to having thus abandoned 5 hindrances, imperfections of the mind that weaken wisdom, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, he enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with delight and pleasure, born of seclusion. Thus, too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. I'll stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha says that if a person can attain the first jhana, then his exertion is fruitful, his striving is fruitful, because this is the aim of the spiritual path. This is one of the objectives of the spiritual path, to attain the first jhana. Again, monks, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, a monk enters upon and abides in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind without applied and sustained thought, with delight and pleasure born of concentration. Thus, too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. This is another objective of the holy life that he achieves. Again, monks, with the fading away as well of delight, a monk abides in equanimity, mindful and fully aware, still feeling pleasure with the body, and enters upon and abides in the third jhana, on account of which noble ones or Aryans announce, he has a pleasant abiding, who has equanimity and is mindful. Thus too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. Again, monks, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain and the previous disappearance of joy and grief, a monk enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and utter purity of sati and equanimity. Here it says mindfulness and equanimity. Thus too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. When his concentrated mind is thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability. All these terms are the characteristics of the fourth jhana. And then he directs it to the knowledge of the recollection of past lives. He recollects his manifold past lives. There is 1 birth, 2 births, 3, 4, etc., 1,000 world cycles, etc. Thus, with the aspects and particulars, he recollects his manifold past lives. Thus, too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. When his concentrated mind is thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, he directs it to the knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings, etc., etc. Thus, with the divine eye or heavenly eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, he sees beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate. And he understands how beings pass on according to their actions. Thus too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. Stop here for a moment. So you see these two, recollection of past lives and the heavenly eye, being able to see beings dying and passing away, in different destinations. These are the two types of psychic powers. So, you see, in the Buddha's Dhamma, psychic powers are not to be shunned. Psychic powers are part of the objective of the holy life. Unlike nowadays, some Vipassana monks, they try to belittle psychic power, say, you should not try to achieve psychic power, you should not try to attach to psychic power and all these things. But in the Buddha's teachings, it's all part of the objective of the holy life. That's why the Buddha says, if you can achieve these two, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. When his concentrated mind is thus purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, he directs it to the knowledge of destruction of the taints. He understands as it actually is. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. These are taints. This is the origin of taints, cessation of taints, way leading to the cessation of taints. When he knows and sees thus, his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of being, and from the taint of ignorance. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. He understands birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. Thus too, monks, the exertion is fruitful, the striving is fruitful. So the Tathagata speaks, monks. And because the Tathagata speaks thus, there are 10 legitimate grounds for praising him. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by what was done in the past, then the Tathagata surely must have done good deeds in the past, since he now feels such taintless, pleasant feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by the creative act of a supreme God, then the Tathagata surely must have been created by a good supreme God, since he now feels such taintless, pleasant feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by circumstance and nature, then the Tathagata surely must have good luck, since he now feels such taintless, pleasant feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by class, then the Tathagata surely must belong to a good class, since he now feels such taintless, pleasant feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by exertion here and now, then the Tathagata surely must strive well here and now, since he feels such taintless, pleasant feelings. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by what was done in the past, then the Tathagata is to be praised. If not, then the Tathagata is still to be praised. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by the creative act of a supreme God, then the Tathagata is to be praised. If not, then the Tathagata is still to be praised. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by chance, then the Tathagata is to be praised. If not, then the Tathagata is still to be praised. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by class, then the Tathagata is to be praised. If not, then the Tathagata is still to be praised. If the pleasure and pain that beings feel are caused by exertion here and now, then the Tathagata is to be praised. If not, then the Tathagata is still to be praised. So the Tathagata speaks, monks. And because the Tathagata speaks thus, there are these 10 legitimate grounds for praising him. That is what the Blessed One said. The monks were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. That's the end of the sutta. So here this sutta shows that this belief of the Nigantas are all useless, and they're striving and torturing themselves, tormenting themselves with all these unbeneficial ascetic practices. It's all in vain, all useless. And then the second part, where the Buddha talks about how exertion is fruitful. This is interesting, this is beneficial, because the Buddha says that if you put forth effort and the suffering can reduce, then you should put forth effort. If you look on with equanimity and the suffering can reduce, then you should look on with equanimity. And also the Buddha talks about the how the exertion is fruitful. The exertion in the spiritual path is fruitful only when you attain these objectives. The first objective here the Buddha mentions is the first jhana, then the second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, and then followed by the recollection of past lives, and then the divine eye or heavenly eye, and lastly the destruction of the taints or asavas. These are the very things that the Buddha attained on the path to enlightenment. Without these let me see, 1, 2, 3, 6 objectives, 7, 4 jhanas, and the 3 abhinyas, the Buddha would not have become enlightened. So these are the footsteps or the footprints of the Buddha. So if you want to talk about the Bodhisattva path, how to become a Buddha. This is the footprints of the Buddha. These are the real Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva path of the Buddha, the real one, according to the suttas, are these 7 steps, attaining the 4 jhanas and the 3 higher knowledges, because these are exactly what the Buddha obtained to become enlightened. So it's not some silly other things that nowadays is taught in other books.